Welcome to Rappahannock Issues. I'm Tom Cohen.
And I'm David Kerr.
And we're going to be looking at topics that are of interest to our community, both regionally and to the state. Welcome to Rappahannock Issues. The Virginia legislature has ended its session, actually a day early, and so we brought back our super panel to talk about the session that was. We have from the University of Mary Washington, Dr. Stephen Farnsworth, from Virginia Commonwealth University, Deirdre Condit, doctor, and we have our co-host of our show and renowned columnist, David Kerr. So welcome to everybody. We start off, the biggest issue heading into the session was ethics. And so might as well start off with that one. Stephen, do you want to lead off the battle with getting into ethics and ethics reform?
The legislature basically spent the entire session figuring out how little they could actually get away with in terms of changing ethics laws. I said the last time we met that I thought the smart move for the legislature was to have a plan before the session started, do something, get it done, and then move on, because it is not good for the legislature's public opinion to have this long, drawn-out conversation. But it came incredibly close to going into overtime between the House and the Senate. There were still disagreements at the last minute about what exactly the shape of this legislation should take. And of course, it may not be over yet. We have yet to hear from the governor on exactly whether he wants to propose some amendments, because the standards by which executive branch employees are subject to ethics rules are stricter than those that apply to the lawmakers themselves. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the governor says, we're going to lower the maximum standards, we're going to tighten the rules, limit the exemptions in terms of what friends can do for friends in lawmakers in high places.
Deirdre?
I think it's been fun to watch, actually, and that's in a sad, tragic kind of way, because the state has been over-occupied with issues that have to do with ethics. Between the Governor McDonald and Mrs. McDonald, and the Morrissey question down in the 74th. And frankly, one is tragedy, one is comedy, and we don't quite as a state know what to do with it, because we've had a long history of having sort of a pristine relationship where we do our gentleman farmer, gentleman agreement method for politics. This is really disconcerting, I think, to the citizens of the state of Virginia. And I agree with you, Stephen, that they drew it out. And if you look at the end product, the fact that even this legislation will not take effect until the end of the year, so as they agreed, we can all go through the election, make sure we really understand what the requirements are, tells you that it was more about protecting themselves than it was about doing serious ethics reform for the state. And ethics reform is hard. There are no illusions about that. But the end product was not particularly powerful.
David?
I remember in reading about the passage of several of the bills was the amount of protest that occurred on the part of the delegates and the senators as they were preparing to vote yes. It was almost as if we were doing that. This is an affront to my honor to vote for this bill, but I will vote for it. Does that ever have the risk of coming back to haunt them later?
Well, it might if there were competitive districts in Virginia. I mean, the important thing to remember whenever we talk about the misconduct of the legislature is that they're basically insulated against defeat. In terms of winning a primary election, if you can manage to keep those hardcore supporters of your party in office and have them show up at a primary when few people do show up, then you're fine. The vast majority of districts in this state basically require a major party, the dominant party nomination in one hand, and a pulse in the other. you don't even have to be criminal-free to get elected and reelected to the legislature, as the Morrissey case demonstrates.
It may be an advantage to have a criminal record in some
Well,
areas.
and it sort of seemed to help him because when Morrissey was voting on an issue about inmates having certain items in their cells, he understood what his population and his voters wanted. But to people who really knew the
Right.
constituency, I thought what was interesting was it was a sort of a moral dilemma too, and an ethical dilemma, in that the Senate seemed to want a pure, pristine, the perfect bill, while the House wanted to do sort of what you're saying, we need to get this done in this session. And it gave you the ethical dilemma that legislators or anybody has when you have to be in a voting position. What do you go for? Do you wait and hold off for what is perfect and not get something, or do you do something because that's what you need to be doing, even if it's not perfect? And it was interesting that you had an ethical dilemma facing an ethic bill.
Remember also, there's a whole lot of chatter going on through the process of this, because the people who we're not seeing are all the lobbying organizations that surround these legislators, about whom this is having a huge impact upon, and they do not want to be foregrounded, but they also do not want to be negatively impacted. So what we only see is kind of the public fishbowl conversation among members of the legislature. What we don't see is how deeply affected they are by the people that we have conflicts of interest with and ethical crises with. And I think that's important not to forget as we think about this political process.
A perfect example of this is Dominion power. When you look at the way that the legislature takes care of Dominion power in terms of protecting them against putting any kind of rebate in for overcharging, protection against all kinds of corporate information being made public. The lawmakers get a lot of money from Dominion power, and increasingly it looks like Dominion power gets its money's worth in return in terms of very friendly lawmaking from the point of view of the legislature. But as you say, that's not what we really see. We don't really see the extent to which these corporate interests want an ethics reform that still allows them to provide the money that allows them to make the influence that they think appropriate for their own industries.
Well, and it's not just the corporate interests. I mean, all the lobbyists. I remember, and it's a way back now, but it used to be at the first day of the session, the delegates and senators had baskets of fruit from almost every group imaginable on there. And so any group, whether it's the teachers or Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or any group wanted to do something they can influence. I said this when we were going before the session, was it's always you look at the most recent crisis and your legislation looked at that rather than something more sweeping. The same way with budgets. And after the break, we'll probably get into the budget non-battle. But the issue was they were looking at this last events with the governor and then the Morrissey type-ish thing, but mainly the governor thing, and looking at that. And budget, every 2 years, they look at the budget instead of sweeping budget reforms, because it's hard to do reforms while you're doing the actual budgets. Do you want either of you want to touch on either the McDonald issue or the Morrissey issue in our final minute before our break?
Morrissey is the most lively issue out there.
It's
sorted.
It's sorted, and it's going to get worse now with Leonidas Young saying he's going to throw his hat in the ring as the Democratic nominee. I mean, Leonidas Young himself, convicted and serving, I think, 18 to 24 months, something like that. We seem to have a penchant for not caring as a democracy right now about who our elected representatives are. There is no challenge. You have thousands of people in the 74th district who could step up for a fine character. But what we get is such apathy and such disconnection that people don't seem to care that the seat is going to somebody, in either case, who's just not perhaps the only choice out there.
Well, we don't want to be disconnected from the issues that are facing the Commonwealth of Virginia. We'll come back after our break, and we'll be going into the budget and other particular legislation that we found. Come on back after.